everyone, I'm Dr. Crystal Abidin, and my training is in anthropology and sociology. I consider myself a digital anthropologist, and what this means is that to understand human culture, I go through what young people do online and analyze their practices, behaviors, and cultural norms. What I mostly focus on is this phenomenon of internet celebrity. Think about everyday ordinary users on social media who, after gaining some sort of momentum online, gaining a few followers, gaining some exposure, eventually become viable enough that brands want to work with them to use their platforms to put out sponsored messages. And here I want to remind us that we're not just talking about shampoo or cat food. We're talking about sponsored messages here. We're also thinking about things along the lines of morality, euthanasia, climate change, alcohol, advertising, and addiction. So sponsored messages here can be thought of very liberally in terms of the types of ideologies, products, or seeding sentiments that we put out with young people. I'm going to put forth today 7 provocations, followed by, or in between, with several case studies for us to understand them. The first is this, that influencers, this really highly relatable form of internet celebrity, can effectively seed opinions and disseminate messages. And what I mean by this is that unlike mainstream traditional celebrities like Angelina Jolie, who have a really nice public portfolio and then come out and be brand endorsers, these everyday ordinary young people appear more like the girl next door or the boy next door. There is a type of relatability or affinity we feel with them. So if a pimple cream were to work on an ordinary peasant like me, then surely it would also be persuasive for an ordinary peasant like you. So you can see how a range of products or behaviors that is more amenable to this form of marketing works great here, but may not map so well when we're talking about traditional celebrities, whom we usually view with a sort of hierarchy, a status distinction, and we may not be able to feel as close or related with them. So to give you a snapshot, here are some stats from projects I've recently finished in the Nordic countries. Prior to this, my expertise was in Southeast Asia, and beginning on this year, I'm looking at a comparative study between 5 East Asian countries and Australia. But back to this Nordic example. When we speak of influencers today, we tend to only focus on scale, the metrics, or the number of followers and likes they have. Oftentimes when I read the newspapers, I see headlines that say, so-and-so influencer has 1 million followers. They are so pervasive, powerful, strong. That is true, but we mustn't also forget the smaller scale influencers, the macro, the micro, the nano, who have different types of functions in trying to persuade young people to make certain decisions. With the mega influencers, this is scaled for a country like Denmark or Sweden, they are basically amplifiers of information. Think about these influencers as experts in science communication. In a very saturated online industry and online space, they have the ability to cut through all that white noise and deliver a message to you. Now that message can come in the form of a meme, a joke, a video, a picture, or something that can be as controversial as bad publicity, as we sometimes see these days with influencers courting bad press. If we look at the middle range of influencers, these are your staple opinion leaders or key opinion leaders as we say them these days. And with the micro and nano ones, these are the smaller scale influencers who've got very niche small communities, but although they don't have the range, they have the great ability to convert people, change their opinions by fostering a very loyal and close following. Here is my second provocation. Influencers are at the forefront of changing internet practices and cultures. Chances are there's a new platform, a new practice, a new campaign, a new catchphrase that young people are using these days. Influencers are the ones pioneering them and disseminating them. They have such a great impact on the mainstream media that today it's not surprising for television, cinema, and radio to invite these influencers as stakeholders to bring young people back to traditional media. The idea being that we're losing eyeballs to the internet, and therefore a 2-minute cameo on cinema or a 5-second cameo via a voice recording on radio would bring young people back to the mainstream industry. We also see public figures like politicians around Southeast Asia adopting the branding techniques from influencers in order to push for their political campaigns. We see newer platforms like live streaming all around East Asia now, where in the olden days, I beg your pardon, I know not a lot of us are that old, but in the 90s, when we used to stay at home, watch television, order things on the phone, right? The same thing is now happening, but via your phones. Instead of picking up a phone and pulling in an order, you just tap a few buttons and the magic product appears at your doorstep the next day. We also have new generations of child influencers. So here we're looking at two genres. We have the genres of influencers who grow up, grow old, have children, and by default expose their children to become second-generation influencers. I've been looking at this industry in Southeast Asia since 2008, and the first batch of women I've been studying have now children who are 4 to 5 years old, all full-blown internet celebrities, all earning much more money than I am every month. There's the second tier of child influencers who are mostly used a lot like props. So the parents may not be celebrities on social media, but there's a cute factor and awe factor of a child playing with goo, holding a product, unboxing videos on YouTube or Instagram, and that attracts eyeballs for the product, but also to fawn over the child as a cute celebrity online. Now this is my third provocation. Most influencers are really excellent at integrating sponsored messages into highly personalized advertorials. Advertorials is a pastiche of the word advertisement and editorial. And knowing the concept of the editorial, we're not expecting here any objectivity. It's meant to be highly personalized, highly persuasive, highly in tune with the lingo and the practice that I share between my followers and myself. So it's not realistic for us to assume that influencers would be objective in the scientific manner or to be able to present facts on both sides of the coin, because this is not how the industry works. Here's an example of a very straightforward advertorial. A really nice picture of Absolute Vodka, or oftentimes an influencer posing with the product. Most times you can't tell apart these photos from everyday ordinary Instagram posts unless you look at the captions. Here very clearly you can see a sponsored hashtag. You can also see a brand handle that points to the influencer trying to amplify these two things. Regularly though, if influencers are not paid to mention a brand, they wouldn't do so because every mention that they make has got value and can be monetized. But it is now increasingly difficult to differentiate between the sponsored endorsements and the personal opinion. This is why this distinction is important. With the sponsored endorsements, it is believed that if I were to market something to you, but make it clear to you that I was paid to say this, you would exercise some sort of adult sensibility and make this information tailored for yourself. Take it with some salt, tablespoon of salt, buckets of salt, as they say in this industry. But if it's personal opinion, people are less likely to question the intentions or the agendas of these influencers. What we're most concerned about in this field today is the notion of astroturfing. It is the orchestrated promotion of all these sponsored messages in the guise of unsolicited, non-commercial casualness. So sometimes you see influencers just sneaking sponsored messages without saying that they are. But if you think about brands on social media, this happens a lot too. Think about all the fast food brands on Twitter who often have witty wars against each other and they get retweeted a lot. That is a campaign. Think about a politician who's really great at taking selfies, posting them on Facebook, and that goes viral by accident. That is also a campaign as part of astroturfing. Here, for instance, are a collection of snapshots from one of the most popular influencers in Southeast Asia. I collected this between December last year and just yesterday. Now, not all of these are sponsored posts in that I could not find a handle or a caption. But you can see conspicuously in all of them, either alcohol, bottle, wine, a Negrini, sometimes just an empty wine glass in the background. Now, this influencer may not obviously be pushing a brand or an agenda, but as part of her strategy called a lifestyle showcase, over a long period of time, she's normalizing that drinking is a completely average, normal, applicable, affordable luxury item, leisurely practice that young people can partake in. Remember also that when we look at the age group of influencers, oftentimes their followers are a notch lower than their age gap. So if I'm looking at an influencer who is 25 to 30, we're going to assume here that their followers are at least 18 to 25. If I'm looking at an influencer who is 18, assume that their followers are about 8 to 18. So they're always marketing to an age bracket lower than them. Here's the newest form of astroturfing on Instagram. Now, if you're familiar with Instagram, it's a social media platform where you upload mostly beautiful, pristine, postcard-looking photos. There is this subculture on Instagram where you take snapshots or you save pictures that are considered aesthetic. The ones that are really pretty that you want to use for your phone background or your laptop background. So these days, instead of just posing with a bottle of alcohol, a lot of these influencers are strategizing with creative artistic direction or with creative photography, piecing together really nice collages that you can save that happen to also feature a really nicely wrapped alcohol bottle here, or in theme with the 4 seasons of the year, one for summertime. Fifth provocation. Each social media platform has its own platform norm and culture. By this I mean that when we look at a social media platform, we cannot just assume that the most popular influencers or the most effective methods of marketing is judged by comments or numbers. Every platform has its own specificity. I have focused so far on Instagram, but we're going to look at another 3 that are also quite popular in Australia. Now, the concept that a lot of these influencers use here is called social steganography. It's basically when you hide messages in plain sight, and only people with contextual knowledge or the tools are able to decode this public message to get the subtext. So if you did not have this background knowledge, this may come across to you as a joke, a meme, a Hallmark card message. But if you're a young person who was into pop culture, into a very specific fandom, you'd be able to pick on symbols, semiotics, and get 2nd, 3rd, or 4th order messages among your in-group. Here are a collection of photos from Tumblr. Tumblr is a platform where the cultural norm is for young people to express self-deprecation, condescending remarks, a lot of celebration of depression, either as a way to talk about mental health issues or a way for young people to be ironic about humor. So for instance, this first photo is one of my favorites for irony. It says here, alcohol tastes better than the thought of you and her. This belongs to a very specific genre on Tumblr where young people make depressive memes after a breakup. The second picture here comes from a subculture on Tumblr that likes to remix art and crafts. No need for an introduction here with the 2 fingers linking, but except now it's with a bottle opener and Heineken. So you see now that with creative arts on specific platforms, even if this is not overt advertising, young people are finding ways to surface these brands and seed them in public memory. We also have, of course, YouTube. And YouTube is this whole other black hole altogether with so many forms of advertising. Just on the Absolute Vodka one, we've got a review, we've got behind the scenes, we've got a formal advertising campaign from the brand, we've got challenges from channels like BuzzFeed trying to compare cheap versus expensive alcohol. Now, the problem with this is that a lot of these promotional contents are thought of as games, memes, or just pure entertainment. It is often not very expressly put out there that it's sponsored content or that was brand involvement. It is often assumed that these brands are just there in the background as props. But by doing so, we are again astroturfing the awareness of the brand among young people. Last but not least of the platforms, the most popular one now hitting our shores is TikTok. It's this really amazing app that you only can use on your mobile phone. It puts out videos of about 6 to 15 seconds of young Australian people doing the most inane things like dancing or taking Zooms and selfies around their school or introducing all their wares at home. Now, this is really tricky and difficult to police because the way this app works is that most of the time you scroll through and you see a post once. It's almost impossible for you to search by keyword, by username, by the post ID to find a post again. So by this factor, it is really difficult for us to store the information in an authoritarian way to compare and to really figure out whether this is advertising or mere vernacular internet content. Last 2 provocations. Alcohol brands and chains are also adopting social media advertising techniques from influencers. Now, when alcohol brands promote on television or in magazines, they're subject to guidelines. On social media, they are sometimes subjected to guidelines. So when I searched for Dan Murphys on Instagram, a prompt came up and asked, are you 18 or over? If I was under 18, I could just click on 18 and over, it still led me to the page. So the onus is on very young children and people to be reporting themselves honestly. Yet, some other brands do not really have this in place. If we look at Thirsty Camel, they do not have just one Instagram brand. All the different Thirsty Camel stores run their own Instagram pages, and there is a huge circulation of promotional content here, as does Liquorland. So a lot of these brands are now mimicking influencers in the way they promote on Instagram and social media. We also want to look at digital advertising companies who do branding and marketing for the brands, and also the fact that there are now platform native ads. So even if I was not looking for any of these contents, just by my search history and my algorithmic recommendations, sometimes these platforms just assume I'm the right target audience for these messages and give me these ads. Last one, influencers have impact beyond commerce, and they can partner with stakeholders to shift mindsets, so it's not all dire. To give you a few examples, I want to push forth the point that although influencers are often thought of as young people's frivolity, it's something that vain young girls do, the fact that we have this mindset is actually extremely lucrative and especially powerful for this industry. It's because our branding of this as frivolous and non-important allows this industry to sit nicely under a radar, to be under police. So while you're brushing these off as young people doing funny things online, they are thriving in their networks and being able to seed their messages. I often like to use this expression, they're like rats in the sewer. If you see one, you ignore one, but you never really know the depth of the situation unless you can get underground. So here is some optimism. Influencers have been studied to be really good educators of sexuality education, giving young people resources on safe sex, safe, healthy relationships. They have also been credited with reinvigorating tradition, albeit through materialist and consumerist ways, bringing forth things that were uncool back to the screen. So maybe television, news orders through the phone might come back in vogue. LGBT advocacy. They've also been credited with raising race and cultural issues in a very palatable way. And last but not least, I want to focus on Instagram once more to stress that of all the social media platforms we have, Instagram is perhaps the one that researchers play catch up with the most, because every other month they're introducing a new feature. And before we can comprehend this feature, to set up a framework, to understand it, to make sure young people can use this properly, a new feature is yet again birthed. So there definitely needs to we need to have some conversation here about how we work with influencers, but also how we partner with these platforms in order that our young people can exist safely on the internet. Thank you.